Hi, everybody, and welcome to issue 8, I believe, of the Retails podcast. How are you, Toby?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. We've had some good weather over here, and I hear you've had some good weather over there as well. So
We have.
summer's coming.
Yeah, summer's finally arrived. Better late than never. So we have the wonderful uniqueness of no guest today, which means we could theoretically rattle on for hours on Zoom, but you do still have a hard stop. So we're going to have to keep an eye on the time so you're not late for a meeting, because we're not going to have the little countdown driving us crazy like we normally do. So today we thought we'd have a look at the state of UK retail, because we went through middle of April, the relaxing of lockdown and the reopening of non-essential stores, and we then had on May the 17th a subsequent relaxing of certain restrictions like eating in restaurants and bars and hairdressers as well. So we wanted to sort of take a look at some of the things that were going on here.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to kind of take a reflection look. I think over here in the States, things have really started to open up. Some states are completely open with no masks and they're just going for it. I think in some of the, like California and Portland, we still wear masks when we're moving around shops and things. But pretty much everyone's, if you want to be open, you can be open. So it's a good time to kind of reflect and see where we are, like nearly 18 months from when we started this kind of pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. Well, what we're going to go to the wonderful world of PowerPoint as well here. Well, we haven't got any guests. So what we've got here are a few slides that we can sort of just run through as discussion points. So we'll start going through these and having a chat and having a look at some of the situations that we've seen. One of the first things that sort of really sort of stood out when April the 12th opened was the huge rush of what the Chinese wonderfully call the revenge shoppers. And we had the huge increase in footfall here. We were seeing a 330% increase of footfall, and the wonderful Primark here talking about how this week from the 12th of April was actually bigger than Christmas. So we get this sort of huge reaction of pent-up demand coming through, don't you think?
I think it's also culturally, I think especially in the UK, a really good friend of mine once said, in the UK, there's only two things that people care about: pubs and shopping. And that's the culture, and it's got to, stores being open, we've got to get back and get shopping again. So I think
Yes.
it just demonstrates as people's just demand to go and see anything.
Yeah, and it was great to see how Primark, who have no online presence, were able to leverage this sort of pent-up demand so successfully. We had Polly Barnfield from Maybe on one of my previous issues, and she highlighted this. Their activity on social media was so effective that there were people queuing around stores overnight to buy a £3 t-shirt. It was brilliant to see how they leveraged that. It was brilliant. What was interesting is just today we had some more statistics come out about the footfall for May, and we were getting some responses here sort of saying, but compared to 2019, because 2020 they said there's no point comparing, footfall was down 27%, but compared to last month, as in April, footfall improved by 12.3% as well, which may well have been down to the fact that the ease of the lockdown and the non-essential stores only happened halfway through April. So it's difficult because you can take these statistics and skew them to any angle that you want. And I think sorry, carry on.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think it's also interesting that to kind of, I'd love to sort of see more depth into the data as well in some ways, because I'm interested to see whether people are, what is it, Saturday shopping? Is everyone's back on Saturday shopping? Like, in the midweek, it's just essentials, and so people are relying on online. I think that just like the behaviors and seeing how behaviors change over the next few months is going to be really interesting.
Yes, I mean, I think we've got a situation where we've got these revenge shoppers, people who are with relief rushing out to do what they want to do. May the 17th, we had things like hairdressers, restaurants and bars reopening as well. So you got this big influx, and you and I were chatting earlier about the state of supermarkets. I was just reading that there has been a drop in some supermarket sales now that restaurants are open. Supermarkets enjoyed a big increase during lockdown. And I was like, well, we're all eating 3 meals a day, so where's the extra revenue coming from? And then I realized it was the closure of bars and restaurants. So that upsurge in supermarket business, I always thought was temporary, because they were basically picking up on the loss of restaurants. But now they're opening, we're getting that reduction. So there's going to be some challenges with supermarkets. There has been a growth of online, and we've been reading, particularly in the UK recently, how the 24-hour supermarkets may be sort of closing through the night to allow for online fulfillment as well. So we're seeing some real interesting shifts, particularly in the food side of things.
That's interesting.
So inevitably, what we also saw is a lot of store closures. I mean, this was just some of the shots I took around central London back in the middle of April when I went down to have a look. And it is a shame, but also a harsh reality that a lot of stores are closing. So we're going to be having to see how these can be reconstituted and redeveloped into something more interesting.
Did you get a feel for? Sorry, did you get a feel for are the stores, are they chain stores where they're having a reduction in the number of stores? Are they independent places that just couldn't survive because they're not part of a chain? Did you get a feel for kind of where the closures were happening?
There was a mix, I noticed. I mean, on the right there is the iconic 214 Oxford Street, which was the Topman store, part of the Arcadia group. There is serious talk of IKEA now buying this, and it'll be interesting to see how they may develop a large city centre format. They've opened sort of small stores in city centres before, but you know, at one end you are having like department stores like Debenhams closing down, but I also noticed that the wonderful Gentle Monster store on Argyle Street, just over the road from Topman, has also closed. So there was no consistent type or style of store that has suffered. I think some of them are tactical closures from big groups, and I'll show in a minute the Microsoft store, which closed and has reopened in a different format. So sadly, there are different types of people. You know, there are companies that just struggled, I think, basically to close. But one of the other challenges that I did find, this was April the 12th, the day that non-essential stores reopened. I was astonished and appalled by how many retailers just hadn't got things prepared. On the left-hand side is one of the big shoe retailers. I don't want to particularly name them, but they had light boxes in their windows and the graphics didn't turn up in time. You know, retailers knew for 6 weeks in advance that April the 12th was when the stores were going to open, but it did appear that a lot of them had kept their staff on furlough until a couple of days before. So the store staff weren't necessarily prepared, and they may have been in lockdown for months, you know, before this happened. So that was inexcusable. And on the right-hand side is my old favorite WH Smith, with a typically appalling window. That they're almost famous for how poor their physical retail estate is on the high street. Clearance sales, not really the way you want to invite people back after lockdown.
It really demonstrates. I mean, I think, and we've talked a little about this offline about how bad, you know, that opening weekend was, and you had a wander around some Leicester, I think, at Foss Park, and it really demonstrates something we've talked about through many of these podcasts about the silos in retail, and that there is the store people, then the store design that maybe weren't ready. And even 6 weeks to get a brief out to an agency, to get an agency to create a campaign and then design the graphics. 6 weeks is a short amount of time for that. But you knew as a group that you were going to open at some point, and you need to rethink about, you know, what is the marketing message? And clearance can't be a strong message to invite people back, nor does it give you a strong confidence to come in and see what we've been doing. So I think it really demonstrates the lack of connected thinking from the store design team connected to the, you know, the overarching marketing and branding teams, all the way through to the operations teams. And, you know, I do feel for a lot of these stores that have had to open and close as, you know, restrictions keep changing. It's been incredible, and the amount of effort they've had to do, but they just haven't been supported by the rest of the organization. And as we kind of focus on, you know, people focus on digital, there's a lot of efforts there, but it's not about focusing on one group versus another. It needs to be, you know, lifting the tide for everyone. And I think it just demonstrates oh fuck it, put some stuff in the window.
Yeah, it sort of felt like that.
Let them stick it up.
You know, the basics, like not getting the promotional graphics ready, you know, messy windows like this. There were like entrance mats covered in chewing gum. There was one store that had 2 meter high like aisle end screens, and the content wasn't running. Is that the black screen of death? And these are basics. And if we're going to get people to come back into stores, you not only got to make it safe for them, you've got to reward them for putting the mask on and going through all of the tests and socially distancing. Make the store enjoyable and fun, as well, because I don't know, I was pretty disappointed. I was expecting to see some wonderful stuff, and stuff like this was around more than the amazing stuff, which is really sad. But I wanted to also emphasize some of the positive sides. And during that same week, I went down to London, and Selfridges, they're just a fabulous retailer. Everyone's saying the department store is dead, and I'm going, well, go and visit Selfridges. They have this sort of outdoor spin cycle class going on, which you could book, and it obviously opened, so it was meeting all of the social distancing restrictions. And it was a great way, again, a bit of social media coverage. They had the second largest queues after Primark to get into the stores as they opened as well that week. And they're just wonderful. You go inside now. You can't use this at the moment, but who expects a skate bowl in a department store, or a cinema for that matter? They just do things so well, and they're constantly reinventing themselves. And one thing I particularly like are these are changing rooms that they've got. And first of all, these changing rooms are in the middle of the shop floor. They're not hidden behind the tills or behind a wall. The one on the left was in one of the fashion areas, and these are frosted acrylic rods sort of mounted end on, and you create this stunning visual feast. And on the right hand side, this was for the kids area, so they created these sort of fun environments for some of the things that most people actually try and hide away as well. Anyone that wants to understand how to create engaging retail, I often say just go and spend an hour in Selfridges, really.
Yeah.
And another retailer I absolutely love is Lush. And they again refitted their global flagship on Oxford Street. And I managed to spend an hour with Sergio, their store manager. And I was intrigued to see how they were going to do this, because in the last few years, I visited the new concept in Liverpool, where they really evolved it, sort of almost inspired by 1950s old traditional department stores. And then I've been lucky enough to visit their 2 stores in Tokyo as well, where they really moved it on. And you can see elements of both of them have sort of come into the store here. On the left-hand side, you see a lot of this sort of flora and fauna. It's a mixture of real stuff at contact point, and high level, they use some recycled plastic plants as well. And on the right-hand side was the wonderful Yo Sushi inspired conveyor belt, which appeared in the Harajuku store in Tokyo, with these sort of back illuminated acrylic walls for the bath bombs. So they've taken a lot of those elements and really built them into the store and evolved it. And what I like is they're not resting on their laurels, because they've had a concept for many years now that people still love, and they're going, yeah, but we need to move on. So it was great to see that.
It just looks, I mean, it's super, it's interesting, all in the same store. Yeah, 3 slightly different experiences, all within the same field. They feel super connected. Great experience to go and hang out and like look at the products. The information's there. I think there's fun. There's a lot of fun and playfulness, especially with the sushi train. I think it's a wonderful way of putting the store, and it's just very live and bright, and the messaging comes through, and it's just as important as the products. It's interesting they haven't got many screens. I haven't noticed many screens in there. Did it feel? I mean, it's one of those ones that always feels, with the chalkboards, it feels very analog. Yes. Which I think is a good, strong position to hold on to.
I always used to call them wonderfully analog stores. There are a few screens in the store, but in typical Lush style, they're not dominating, they're not showing off with technology like a lot of companies want to do. And they were you can sort of book things in the spa, because they have a spa treatment room in the basement area. And then they were just sort of scrolling, offering things like subscription services. So it was really considered content. So there's not a lot, and I suppose the only other sort of tilt towards technology is they've always had wonderful little place cards with really nice communication hierarchy. And the new versions are slimline versions, and they have QR codes, so you can actually scan the QR code to learn more about the product. So that's an acknowledgement that the phone is playing a bigger part in the store. But they're a great example that you don't need to show off with technology. You can actually present product in a really interesting, engaging way that people will just love, because it's a physical experience, and they do it so well.
You mentioned the membership, so that was going to be my next question. Is it one thing I've noticed in some of the Lush stores over here is they they've started to focus far more on community and trying to engage that community. And I wondered if that because community is a hard thing to show in the store. You can have people talk about. I didn't know if the community aspects came up in any way.
Not overtly. The subscription content was running on the wall, and there will be sort of there are little bits that are subtle considerations of different elements of community, but the bit that really came through was diversity. And Sergio pointed out a couple of things to me that I hadn't overtly noticed because they didn't want to shout loudly. They're a little bit like Nike with the diversity, in that it's sort of subtly implemented rather than a thing they want to wave the flag at and get kudos for. There's an Afro hair treatment area, and you only really notice there's not a big sign saying Afro. There was a very small screen, maybe 8-inch screen in the fixture with a rolling loop of Afro hair treatments. And the other one that I particularly liked was there was a hair treatment area where you can sit down at a sort of a desk with a member of staff, and they can run through treatments, and there's a screen where you can learn about things as well. But there is a subtle sort of curtain that you could draw around, so anyone who's wearing a hijab could actually go through the same treatment experience, but discreetly, and they could then remove their hijab as well. And again, I wouldn't have noticed it if Sergio hadn't pointed it out to me. And one of the things I liked was actually Sergio was heavily involved in the store design and development as well. It wasn't tokenism. As he was pointing out, going, I wanted this, so the store design team included it as well. And it was great to see that trust in the senior store staff, in that they would play a huge part in the development of the store as well.
It's just great to see the inclusive design. I think I've always used Lush as really good examples of inclusive design, from everything from ability to race to who you are, and just including everyone as a baseline. I think it's just great to see.
It is. I mean, there are so many aspects of this store that I could take people to, a bit like Selfridges, and going, if you want to understand physical retail, go and visit this store. Now here's our old friends Souk. We had John, their CEO, on one of our previous issues, and they are a wonderful example of how to take a physical space and start to reconstitute it in a different way. They're busy opening lots of stores. I'm going up to visit their Edinburgh store at the end of this month. Keen to sort of see how that's opening as well. And the great principle here of being able to rent by time of day and day of week for temporary space, so people use this for a couple of hours or a certain day of the week, or block book it out. And it's really a great way of understanding when your customers may be at the physical space and only being available at that time, so you're not renting space when your customers aren't there. Great idea. And then I touched on this earlier on. Microsoft have closed all of their stores, and I was a bit surprised to see the London one closed. I think it'd only been open for about 18 months, but there was a global policy. But when I arrived at the store, it was actually open, and they've turned it into what they call a MEC, which is a Microsoft Experience Center. And I think 4 or 5 of the big stores around the world are doing this at the moment. And what they were showcasing was primarily their laptop range, just on the ground floor of the store. And a member of staff meets you at the entrance, follows you around. I mean, it almost feels a little bit imposing because they shadow you very closely, but they did explain that was to ensure that they could clean anything you might have touched. So it was more of a COVID security thing than slightly oppressive sales technique. But when you showcase these things, I'm not sure if you can see in the top right hand image there, the laptop has a QR code. So if you like the product that's demonstrated, you scan the QR code, you can then order that laptop and it'll be delivered at home. So it's a great example of that, this sort of growing area of try online, buy in store, deliver to home as a new way of combining different channels.
It's really hard. I think there's always a joke over here that quite often the Microsoft stores are where you need to go if you need to get a break, because there's no one ever in them. And they've invested so much, and like you see, they're really beautiful stores, they're great fixtures, but I think it's a challenge, like Apple. The difference between an Apple store and a Microsoft store from football is just insane. And Apple stores over here are kind of redesigning themselves to be much more about dropping in for service. There's a lot of booking online, and you can pick it up, but there's very less about that browsing as there used to be. I'm very interested to see how Apple, whether they do the town halls again, whether they bring them back again, because they've obviously put all of those on hold. But I think there is something missing from the Microsoft stores. I think, yes, it's important to see how to use the equipment, but we have Best Buy that over here, which is a kind of, I always compare it to Dixon's, and no one knows what Dixon's is, or Curry's.
It's Curry's now. It's all Curry's.
I was going to say, I don't even know if Dixon's or Curry's exist anymore, but the Best Buy is a very similar thing. But the interesting thing that they've done a really good job, it's a bit like we were talking earlier about some of the sporting goods and some of the other issues, is like they bring in other devices and other environments, and they create these environments so you can feel like you're in the kitchen or you can feel like you're in the bedroom. And sometimes I think these Microsoft stores miss some of that, and it's very much about celebrating the technology versus, you know, how do you use the technology. And for it to be an experience center, it's experiencing the product, forgetting that actually you might be in bed, you know, like actually a lot of us watch Netflix in bed on our laptops or on iPads. And so I don't know, there's something, it's one of those briefs I've always liked to have. I'd like to be able to take a look at the Microsoft Store and really kind of rethink it and sort of see what they can do that's different to even Google have stores now, Google and Samsung, you know, like what's the difference that only Microsoft can do?
I agree. I mean, I saw 4 or 5 years ago, I saw the Microsoft Store in New York, and I walked in and I walked back out to check the signage because I'm like, oh, it's Microsoft. I thought it was Apple. And every single tech company has opened a store, and I'm surprised Apple haven't sued them all. It's just a blatant rip-off. Pale wood, big band of illuminated graphics along the wall, square tables with product on. And you know, Huawei have done the same, Samsung did the same, you know, everyone was doing this. And I'm like, why are you trying to look like one of your biggest competitors? I think Apple, the great thing with Apple though, is the stores are these wonderful meccas of learning and exploration, but like you say, they've evolved into order fulfillment. But it's not about the store, it's about the brand. And that store is just one of the touch points, you know, and it's something they do so well. Whereas this store seemed to be a ta-da, here's the physical space, and you go in, and they've got a McLaren there. You can sit in and do driving, and it's, you know, queues of teenagers wanting to sit in the McLaren. And it was a clever technique, and it's in the window and it drives footfall. But I'm like, come on, I don't think Microsoft need to put a £900,000 car in the window to succeed. You'd never see Apple do something that gimmicky, you know. I love the Xbox room. I made the mistake of taking my kids up there. I had to, you know, grab them by the throat and haul them out to get them out. But that's exactly what they want. But that I thought was genius. It's a darkened room, and there's just thousands of consoles, and you can play. And that's how you you know, that to me was a great thing for Microsoft. But these bits, I'm just not convinced that it's worth the investment, to be honest. Now this did surprise me. This is the Adidas flagship in London, and I love this store. It's the first time I really felt that Adidas got physical in the way that Nike have for years. But I was a bit surprised that this global flagship, the whole entrance promotion area was a sale. And I don't know what your thoughts are. This is more your world than mine, but I was a bit surprised to see that.
I was also going to say that looks quite a sad sale. Like that, I don't know whether it just is a bad photo. This is unfair, but it looks like someone's just sellotaped the word sale on a piece of on a seat there. So I think what it demonstrates, and I think one of the things it's really interesting to do, and you mentioned that especially as the flagship, is to be able to think very carefully about how you do sale. Obviously, everyone is looking for a bargain right now. Everyone knows that the control is in the consumer's hands because there's a lot of stock. There's a lot of stock to move. People know that. People aren't stupid. It's not like anyone's fooling them. So I think everyone's looking for a bargain. But like you say, to put that as your entrance story for the flagship, it's very short-termist, I guess. I think that's the thing is that it could create upticks for the next few months. It could get people in stores. Honestly, you look at that Primark queue, and if it's about the $3 t-shirt, then maybe that makes sense. But it's the damaging. It's the ongoing. How does that affect the ongoing brand attention that you're going to get, or the brand engagement that you could get? And by leading with a story which is much more, Nike at the moment I've got a wonderful campaign. I had nothing to do with it, so I can actually say it's good rather than being bigging up. But it's a wonderful campaign around play new, and it's around people discovering new things. And it's just very much so around accepting the insight that through COVID people have started yoga because that's all they could do, or that they've started cycling because they knew that there wasn't the gyms anymore. And so they've really leaned into this idea of trying new things. And it kind of connects to going back out to bars and shops again. It's about trying new things, being brave. There's lots of things we're dealing with at the moment, and a lot of self-care, and really understanding how we can work together to be that brave force of good. And so you go into the stores and it feels like optimism. I mean, honestly, a lot of the ads, a lot of other things, it feels good to be there, and the campaign is front and center. And yes, there are still sales. I'm not saying that they're not doing sales, but when you actually discover the product, you've already fallen in love with the brand, fallen in love with the new products, and you find out that it's a discounted price. It's a great closer. But to lead with the sale, I think has a tendency or a potential to damage the brand.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Nike Town, half a mile along the road, had the massive Move to Zero campaign. And, in typical Nike style, there's about 5,000 square feet of Move to Zero experience on their ground floor that was then continued throughout. So, yeah, it was a stark difference because, like you say, people know there's deals to be had. Right, this is one of my favourite topics. Oxford Street, the development, the Westminster Council have got 150 million pounds to develop Oxford Street, and there are a number of activities going on at the moment. And the first thing that was signed off, and they're just starting to build, is this Marble Arch Mound. So it's a temporary 25-metre high structure, and I think there's some sort of demonstration or showcase inside, which is where you can see the light at the bottom. But then it will literally be built up with turf and trees as a focal point. They think it will attract 200,000 people in the next year to come and have a look. I don't know what your thoughts are on spending this money to regenerate Oxford Street, because I'd be fascinated to get your view.
I think we have a different opinion on this, and it's interesting because I think there's some really good examples where people have genuinely brought new people to areas through non-traditional means. The High Line in New York, for example, is an incredible example of bringing people to the meatpacking district, for example, that was super dangerous and super, you didn't want to go and hang out there. And just by having these spectacles, I guess, quite often do attract a bunch of people. I think your point around behaviors are interesting around, okay, but are they here to shop? Are they then going to connect and go into other areas? And I think the High Line is interesting because there's a really long story about the High Line and what people wanted to do with it. It wasn't there to drive traffic. It drove traffic because it's a really good thing in itself. So I think it's a difficult one. And I do think I do think this is interesting. I do think it's something that people will want to see. I do think people need more green spaces in London, in central London. I do think people will come and hang out. It's whether go back to our point around different zones of areas and how you break those zones apart. I don't know whether that would necessarily will work and create we'll have the right people then going on to Oxford Street. I feel like the people who are excited by a mound full of trees are the people who want to then go and hang out in high-end boutiques and have a nice glass of wine and kind of spend those things. And if the Oxford Street stores don't support that, then it's actually going to be disappointing. I'll come for the mound and then end up in a vape shop or end up in a a phone shop, and that's a break in my expectations. So I'm in two minds a little bit, but ultimately quite positive about it if they can support it in the long term.
I mean, I want to be positive about it. I mean, the interesting thing is I'm going to want to go and see it myself. Even if I just go, it's shit, and post about it, fair enough, but I'm going to go. And that's half the battle, is getting people to go. And I do want it to work. I'm pleasantly surprised how quickly and how considerately the council are moving forward. I've had conversations with some people that are involved in this, and they're saying just how considerate the council are, and they've got 150 million pounds and they're spending it. That's what's interesting. I mean, this is already happening in Regent Street, where they're widening the pavements and they're starting to build these little mini parks and planting flowers in these little modules. They design these module bits for seating and display and for greenery, and that's already happening. And so they are responding quite quickly with this sort of thing.
And I think there's 2 points here. Is going to be the widening of payments. I think is generally something everyone should be doing. I mean, I haven't got any data to back it up.
Yes, exactly.
I feel, especially Regent Street, it was always such a busy street. It just felt kind of dangerous, especially with kids sometimes going down Regent Street. And I think what we're seeing more of, and what we've been a positive out of COVID, is having more restaurants with tables in the pavement and moving the pavements into the road, and reducing the car traffic is generally a good thing for cities. And I think it kind of leads to my second point, is what's interesting with these little mini oases is the seating. If it can encourage behavior change that encourages you not to steam down Regent Street to get to Toys R Us, not Toys R Hamleys, or if you can get people to slow down and encourage them to sit down and chat and actually spend more time there, and you can have food carts on the road, you know, then shopping becomes more of a it goes back to the thing we talked about, I think, in the first episode of it's a day trip. You go and spend the day, you know, engaging in restaurants and food and sitting and enjoying company and meeting friends, and also engaging with brands, and that could ultimately end up with purchase. I think those are really, really powerful tools. And if the Hill can encourages all of that, that's great. But if it's just this one thing that's separate on its own, I think that's not going to work. So I think it has to always be grounded in behavior change.
It does, and it needs to be comprehensive. And there have been 2 discussions in the last few years about pedestrianising Oxford Street. And personally, I think that would be genius. You know, you could end up like Las Ramblas in Barcelona, but with fewer pickpockets, hopefully. And you could have a really, really useful space. And the conversation happened last year, but apparently it was the objections of the residents in the streets off Oxford Street that stopped it, because obviously all the traffic through Oxford Street would then be going through those side streets. Personally, I think it's a shame, because Oxford Street needs help. You know, there are about 20 of these candy and souvenir stores all the way. I couldn't believe it, had 20 of them. You know, really cheapening the street. It needs as much help as it can get, but maybe that's down to the sheer wealth and influence of the people that live just off Oxford Street that stop that. But I think it's a pity, because you imagine having the full width of that street to develop these engagement and dwell spots. It'd be fabulous. It would be.
Well, it's an interesting conversation, because I think, yes, it would push the traffic to the side streets, but if you think about one thing on its own, of course, you're just pushing the problem somewhere else. And I think what needs to continue to always happen is the focus on large scale city zoning and city plans that says, if we are moving the traffic back, because sometimes you'll be on Oxford Street and you'll see trucks going down Oxford Street. And I've always wondered, like, what is in that truck? Why is the truck going down Oxford Street? It's a bad decision from the driver. Is it a mistake? You know, the buses are moving people around. Now, if you get rid of the traffic, people can walk around and they don't need to be using those buses. I understand that the implication of moving the traffic to the next road, but if it's planned in such a way that says, well, here is a bus lane, or here is a truck lane, or here are those other things, then it makes those other spaces feel more residential. And so, could you just keep on what's it called? You know, getting rid of the roads, pedestrianising. So you actually become a whole zone of pedestrian areas, which I'm sure that those residents would love, but obviously has other implications further on. So it just needs to, like we keep saying, needs to be thought about cohesively and comprehensively.
I agree, but it's great to see that the approach has been taken, and I know there are changes afoot in Paris as well, with the Champs-Élysées, where they want to have more greenery and widen the pavements as well. So there is a groundswell of interest in doing these sorts of things. Now, this is a really exciting development which is happening along Oxford Street, just opposite Tottenham Court Road, and right outside the new international rail link as well. It's called Outernet, and it's effectively a whole block that is being redeveloped, and it was bought about 10 years ago. And the idea here is they're going to have one massive experience space using some of this 4D screen technology that I've been seeing loads of little clips of in Asia. There are going to be two underground, it's an underground experience centre, 2 pop-up stores. And I know as a music lover, you'll be pleased to know that they're redeveloping Denmark Street as well, Toby, which was a classic street in the 60s and 70s full of musical stores. And they're completely regenerating it, and they're giving preferential lease rates to music and instrument retailers so they can bring it back to how it was before as well. So this is supposed to be opening in October, and I saw the development in April where they're actually sort of building this structure, and it's really taking shape now. So this is a really bold thing, and it will also help develop the east end of Oxford Street, which has always been the poor relation as well.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting space for sure.
It is. It's going to be really, really nice. And then finally, we're also seeing that some of the big stores along Oxford Street are being redeveloped. The Debenhams department store, they're working on sort of stripping it out at the moment, and there are various plans. One of them was actually turning it to an arts and community centre, which would have been really interesting. But we're also seeing how two of the big traditional retailers, Marks and Spencer's and John Lewis, are looking to apply for change of use of their stores, with the addition of more office space as well, which is an interesting development when there is considerations with work from home growing, that there may be less need for office space. And Sir Norman Foster, the famous architect, was actually saying what may happen is a lot of office space will be converted into residential space. So you may find there'll be a subsequent change in application for this in a few years' time. But it is interesting to see that this sort of change of use is starting to come through, which is inevitable because we've got too much retail space now.
Yeah, there's a shout out to my friend Claire, who's doing a lot of work with Kingston upon Thames, in Kingston upon Thames, and I'll make sure we add the link to this, because she's been doing some work with students and kind of artists, and using old office space around Isle of Dogs and turning it into artists' studios effectively, which is, I think it's really interesting, because it's old office space that is currently not being used and not going to be used in the foreseen future. It's not a great building. It's not, no one's going to look at it and go, yes, that's our HQ. I think living there, I think, is residential is going to be a bit of a challenge. But what's interesting is by creating these studios, is created these little spaces that feel, they're not stores, they're actually workspaces, but people can come in, they have open houses. So on a Saturday, you can come through and buy whatever it is that they're making. And so they're making revenue. It's just a really interesting mixed use space, and enabling students who have no money, effectively, not even any starting point, to use those spaces. And I do think whether it's about changing the zoning or about looking at mixed use spaces, I think there's going to be some really interesting opportunities for people to use those spaces, especially on the high street, to bring back some sense of arts and crafts. I think it would be a great use.
Yeah, there was a similar thing in that proposed arts and community centre for Debenhams, where the basement would be craft and creative people, and then the ground floor would be the space where they sold it. But so I hope that happens. I've also been reading a bit about how city centre farming could develop. There was somewhere in East London where they were using an old multi-storey car park to actually grow vegetables. So you're literally having urban farming, which would be great as well. And so I'm hoping there'll be more of that creativity, because there is a lot of space available, and I just hope all the creative people get the opportunity to utilize it as well. So
cool. Well, it looks to conclude, it looks like the UK have got some interesting things. There's obviously some super big challenges with store closures and stores not getting ready. But like you say, I do hope that it enables us to, the creatives to kind of come in and take advantage of some of those opportunities. And I think things are definitely going to be interesting over the next couple of years.
I agree. Right, we better let you go to your meeting, which starts in a minute. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see if we can bring someone back as a guest speaker for our next issue. Take care, and thanks very much.